Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here at my next Voltron Season 2 discussion video. This one's going to be covering my initial thoughts on the last 4 episodes of Season 2. So we're covering episode 10, 11, 12 and 13, which are Escape from Beta Thez, Staying Alive, Best Laid Plans, and also Blackout as the finale. It's hard with this one in that, like, I considered recording this video last night, and I think if I did, I would have been super frustrated and very annoyed with the show, and been, I think, a bit overly critical of it, because I was hugely disappointed when I finished watching these episodes for the first time. I think now, having kind of, like, recording this the following morning, I've calmed down a bit, but I think I've come to an understanding with this show that we always relate it to Korra because it's made by the same people, but it really isn't on the same level as Korra at all. At least what they've showcased in the first 2 seasons. It's not there yet. In that they have the animation, they have the, like, core of kind of characters, they have the potential with some of the mysteries they set up, but they can't execute well enough to deliver on them yet. And I think a lot of it comes down to my thoughts on the overall season, at least right now, that it's a lot of, like, mysteries and questions raised without many of them being answered. And then the couple of answers you do get, they don't really cover the arc all that well. And what I mean by that is that, like, what are the key plot points? Like, reflect on season 2. What are the key things that happen to our characters in the plot this season? Most notably, they defeat Zarkon. That's big. That's the entirety of the main plot since the first episode. But have they won back the galaxy? No. Like they set it up at the end that, like, I assume Zarkon's son, the prince, is coming, and that will continue the battle. So it's not over just yet. And I think that was always going to be a problem with this show, in that Zarkon, as far as we were aware, is basically the emperor of almost the entire universe, minus, like, a couple of planets that he seems to have missed, like Earth and so on. But then there's the implication that the Galra came to Earth, but we don't know what happened there. So again, like, questions raised, but, like, none really answered. In that, like, this whole plot was just like, this is going to be the final battle, but it blatantly was never going to be the final battle. Then you think about the other plots. Shiro and his connection to the Black Line plus Zarkon. That was covered very early on, and they kept touching upon it, and they continued to touch upon it. And ultimately it was cool. Like, Shiro getting the Black Bayard back at the end, and that really being the thing that helped them to defeat Zarkon in his giant mech at the end. That was cool, seeing, you know, finally the Paladins and Voltron are fully complete. Shiro has the Bayard. But it didn't quite have the impact that I felt it should have. Equally, Keith being half Galra. I still don't get why they chose to stop the flashback at the point that they did. Like, I still don't know what the reason was for why Keith decided to leave rather than stay, or what the implication was that would have happened if he chose to stay in the flashback and listen for a little bit longer. As it is, it just continues on that, like, okay, Keith knows this one tiny fact about himself, that he's Galra, and no reasons as to, like, why that has much meaning, or, like, why exactly he is Galra. Like, the implications that his mother is Galran and something happened on Earth with Galra, but you just leave that blank. And I feel like this was the biggest culprit of it this season, in terms of them presenting you somewhat of a mystery, but asking way more questions in the process, because Keith being revealed to be Galra ultimately has very little impact on, like, the rest of the season. It's that one episode, The Blades of Marmora, and then it's Allura just throwing a bunch of shade towards Keith, like, not talking to him and just having to deal with that. It becomes more of an arc for Allura than it does for Keith. In that, yes, Keith seems to have kind of somewhat gained an acceptance of himself, and, like, there's somewhat of development there, and that, like, the stuff that he's doing, he's being very open to Galra, and the fact that it's not all of the Galran people that are the problem. That's cool. But ultimately you turn what should be a big thing about Keith discovering who he is into a Allura needs to accept that not all people are bad. And it leads obviously to the moment at the end of like, ultimately in the final battle, it's Allura plus the two blades of Marmora that are with them fighting Hagar and the druids, which I thought was cool, kind of the sign of trust that she went into that fight with just the two of them. None of the paladins were with her, but they got it done and she trusted them. That's fine, but it was a very basic arc in terms of like, it literally was just Keith revealing to everyone that he's half Galra, and then just Allura not talking to him for a bunch of episodes, and then deciding just before like, oh, like I may never see you again, so I want to resolve this before you go, and kind of them having that moment. I liked that moment. I really did like that moment of the hug just before he left, and that like, I personally didn't interpret it as romantic at all. I felt they actually managed to nail that moment without it in any way coming across as romance. That it was just her being so sorry for kind of being that way around him, and honestly accepting the fact that like all of the paladins kind of coming in at this point in time, the sacrifices they've made, she trusts them so much that they are like family to her, and if she lost any of them, including Keith, even though he's half Galran, it would be something that hurts her. So I like that a lot, even though it wasn't the best executed arc. Paige obviously had the reveal that she basically finds out that Matt is alive and has been captured by rebels of some sort. This was probably the weirdest execution of like a setup plot I've ever seen, in that that's all it is. Just episode 10, they touch on it, and then it's just kind of gone. Like, I get, like, it was a heat of the moment that, like, Paige needed to focus on what was happening in the prison, and she couldn't in any way kind of tackle what was happening there. She just got the information and then looked at it afterwards. But it was just like, wow, that just feels very unsatisfying. Like, the only setup, like, there are only 2 moments in this whole season where they address Paige's, like, family, really. She talks about them a few times every so often, that it's still her goal. But just the idea that, like, we have Ulas in, like, one of the first episodes of the season mentioned that he knows of other human prisoners. And then this episode, which just hints that he's alive, he's older, and they're apparently using him for his knowledge or something like that. Or was that meant to be... I think that was meant to be Slav. But either way, like, that he was captured for some reason. Which is interesting. It's a cool mystery. But, here's the thing. The mystery around Keith, the connection to the Black Line, they were all mysteries from Season 1. And then Season 2 tried to approach them and didn't do them that well. So right now the show has me in a position where, like, I don't have a ton of faith that these mysteries that is presented here are going to be resolved all that well. Like, who was the Galran person that Keith saved from inside the Beldum? I think that's what it was called, the giant planet eating laser firing thing in space where they got the crystals from. Like, are we ever gonna like touch on that character again? Like, it just has a really weird way of setting up kind of plot points, whereby it's just like, here's a thing. Now that thing is gone, and let's never reference it again, apart from like when they eventually do in like Season 3 or whatever. I just think that this show is just, it feels like the show is so precious with its information that, like, oh yeah, we've got backstories for all of these characters, but we're only going to show you the tiniest bit because we want to see you kind of squirm, and we want to see you really want this information before we deliver it. And it's to the point where I really feel that, like, reflecting on Season 2, they didn't end up accomplishing a ton, minus the fact that we defeated Zarkon, the main plot point. Like, character-wise, I really don't feel we've covered all that much. I think they ended up touching on Shiro and the Black Line and the connection so much that by the end, the moments were cool, but they just didn't have quite the impact because the character arc of it was done so early on that them continuing to touch on it over time was just kind of frustrating. Keith and Galra, like, they're obviously going to address this at some point, but I really don't know how or when or how exactly it's going to happen. It's just kind of a little bit all over the place. Equally so, stuff like the reveal with Allura and Hagar at the end, in that, like, okay, Hagar is Allura, Altean. Sorry. Okay. Like, she clearly has somehow betrayed the Altean Empire and joined Zarkon, which I think it's meant to lead into part of the reason why like Zarkon changed, and it kind of highlights her as a somewhat important character. But again, it was one of those moments where just like a thing happened. Now let's cut away from it. Let's not address that plot point at all. Let's just leave it there, and we'll come back to it later. So much of the important, like the notable things for me this season were just moments like that. Introduce an interesting thing, walk away from it. And this was one of them. In that it's clearly something very interesting, in that she seems to be the core of why the Galran Empire has magic. And that seems to be a huge aspect of like Zarkon wanting the magic to improve all of his powers and stuff like that, to make all the beasts and so on. And how exactly those two met is going to be an interesting one. Hagar herself as a character, I thought was okay with how she was done, in that like I think in season 1 they kind of presented her a little bit differently. That almost that she was kind of manipulating Zarkon, that she was the one ultimately in control because she controlled the magic. This season they went more for the idea that, okay, Zarkon's in control, and she respects that. She likes him as the leader, but she is frustrated by the fact that he's so beeline focused on the Black Line and Voltron and getting them on their side, that he's spending everything, all of his attention, everything's happening in the background, spies are infiltrating, and he's not focusing on that because he's so focused on the Black Line and so on. That's interesting in that, like, you kind of wonder, was she ever going to, like, turn her magic on him and take over? But she didn't. Which to me highlights that there's a huge respect that she has for him, to the point where she would never want to go against him. She always backed off just as it seemed like he was about to get angry, so I'm kind of wondering if there's somewhat of a relationship there, potentially romantic, even if it's just Hagar towards Zarkon. I suppose Zarkon himself, I think he ultimately ends up being the biggest kind of failure of this season. I was interested in him after the first season because I think they presented this idea of this former paladin of Voltron who was corrupted by interacting with magic. This season, he spent the majority of his on-screen time being zapped by magic to locate the Black Line, and not really developing his character. And I really noticed this just throughout the middle part of the season. Every scene you see Zarkon in, it's Hagar talking to Zarkon as the druids are zapping him with electricity and kind of that power armor to kind of help him locate the Black Line. It was an obsession, a focus to a degree where it just made him uninteresting as a character. To the point where I'm just like, you are the, like, meant to be the emperor of the galaxy, like everything, minus a couple of planets. And this is all you're focused on. Like, explain to us why you so desperately want the Black Line. And I think that's the problem with that arc, in that they never really established, outside of Zarkon wanting the Black Line as a powerful weapon, why he was so obsessed with it. Because he made a mech suit that could beat that could beat Voltron, but it was the power of all of the paladins together and all the lines working in tandem that ultimately defeated that. So how is he going to use part of Voltron, or the full Voltron, to a degree where he could make it more powerful than a thing he already had and could control on his own? It's just, there's a leap in logic there that I don't think made a ton of sense, and they should have done better to develop it. The problem is that they absolutely needed to go into that flashback moment that Shiro experienced a bit more. When the Black Line showed Shiro kind of the past, I think prior to defeating him, even though he's not dead, I know that, they should have committed to explaining somewhat of why Zarkon betrayed the Altaeans, why he went rogue, and why he basically forced Alfor to kind of hide Voltron. You needed to touch on that moment more and give a further reason for why everyone was fighting him. As it was, the motivations were just kind of like, Zarkon's the evil guy and let's go on. Like, you had that moment where after they've kind of finished assembling their plan, just before the final battle happens, you have all 5 paladins standing there and they're like, is everyone thinking about Zarkon? Yeah. And then Hunk is like, nope, I'm thinking about calzones. And his line about just like, oh yeah, I get it, Zarkon's a bad guy, but I'm hungry, was just like, Hunk is actually correct. Like, they don't know Zarkon as a character all that well. So, like, they just know he's the evil guy. Like, they don't know anything about him to, like, fully kind of get to the point where, like, they have a real kind of vested interest to defeat him outside of the fact that he's controlling the galaxy. Like, I felt like just because of the Paladin connection, like, why did no one ask the question of, like, can you tell us who the other Paladins were? In that I think that there's a line of dialogue earlier on in the season from Karan where he basically alludes to the fact that Alfor was the pilot of the Red Line, because he says, as he's about to, like, get into the Red Line, that, oh, I'm going to follow in the footsteps of Alfor. So I assume that was specifically referring to the Red Line. But anyway, so yeah, I'm pretty much going to end the video there. Like, obviously, these are very fractured thoughts. It's mainly about the season as a whole, rather than these 4 episodes in particular. But I felt like the prison episode was a bit unnecessary, in that I didn't like Slav that much as a character. I just felt his whole, obsession with, like, little things just was annoying. And I think that was the point of the character, but it was annoying to the point where, like, no, this goes beyond a character trait. This is just, like, oppressively annoying when he's on screen. And then the whole plot with the prison warden, I just thought was, like, kind of a one-off, like, kind of, wouldn't say filler, because it's not filler, but it just was a kind of needless kind of distraction part of the plan. The return to the Balmera I liked, you know, Shay with her line about his hunk here, and the return of one of the enemies from last season, but empowered by the crystal, leading to a big fight, you know, just like the final standard fight before we get into the big fight, and then the kind of final 2 episodes addressing the major fight. Using the Teladav, it was interesting, just seeing, like, Shiro hold his own for so long, and then everyone come in and them hold their own. The plan beginning to fall apart, but ultimately them wormholing the ship. You know, Thane making the sacrifice, Keith acknowledging it, seeing it, and just the plan working, leading to the moment where Zarkon's ship is stranded in space, Voltron forms, the final fight's going down. There were definitely some epic moments in the fighting, and the animation was really on point. It's just, in the end, it didn't have a ton of impact because I don't feel we knew Zarkon all that well. If we had known, like, his reasons for betraying everyone, this fight would have had so much more impact. But I'm going to end it there before I start repeating myself. So there are my thoughts on the final couple of episodes of Voltron. There'll be a podcast in about a week's time that I'll put up on my channel where myself and the other podcast hosts discuss it in depth. I'll probably do another video at some point as well on the season as well, once I have more time to form my thoughts. But for now, there are my thoughts. So thanks for watching this video, and bye.